Hey, this is Steve for myothercareer.wordpress.com. And in today's video, I wanted to reflect back a little bit about, or a little bit on completing the Words on Paper draft of Pride is Forever and just talk about the project a little bit and what I learned from it and my experience. Tried to get this video done a couple times over the last week, but I've just had problems getting time to sit down. My wife is off for spring break this week, or was off. She's a teacher, so she's been home, and when I've been home, I've just done things with her, and we've just had other stuff that's come up, so it's been hard to find a good 10 minutes to sit down alone and record my thoughts. But I got some time right now, so I thought I'd take advantage of it. Here is the completed draft of Pride is Forever. Just give you an idea how thick it is. It came in at, I think, 106 pages. Yes, just, here's the last page, just over 106 pages. Give you, it's all in there. I've got it posted to the blog if you wanted to peruse through it, although I don't, I'm not saying you need to or should, but it's there just to prove that, yes, I actually wrote it. You saw my progress. I'll go ahead and end up polishing it up over the next week or so, maybe 2 weeks, and really bring it to first draft material. Main difference between a Words on Paper draft and a first draft is Words on Paper draft is kind of like a rough draft. You got grammar errors in there. There's maybe some continuity stuff you got to fix up, standardize the scene headings. Maybe you want to change a character name. If there's a character, a couple characters I want to change. There's stuff that you'll need to fix before you would consider it a first draft. I wouldn't let anybody read. I wouldn't give somebody a Words on Paper draft to review. I would work on it before I consider it a first draft and then let them read that. Because this is a very raw document and story, and there needs to be not necessarily story elements changed, but you got to clean it up. There's stuff you just need to clean up. So I wanted to just talk a little bit real briefly about the difference between a Words on Paper draft and a first draft. I don't really consider this one of the strongest things I've written. It's definitely a step back from Served Cold, but at the same point, there were some challenges and things I tried to accomplish here that I hadn't done before. First off, I've never adapted anything that I've never adapted true life events. Everything I've written has always been fictitious. So to adapt things that happened in real life into a screenplay was challenging, and it was hard. It's something I'd never done before. And if I were to do something similar, there's a lot I learned working on this that I would be able to adapt. Also, it was a hard drama. I mean, everything else I've written before this, I could spruce things up and make things more interesting by incorporating some action elements. The bad guy showing up at an inconvenient time and things like that. And in this story, it's hard. It's real, so I can't do that. There's no gunfights. There's no violence. There's none of that. It's just a guy on a path towards a goal. A couple other things that I took back. I found myself falling into some bad habits regarding how I did dialogue. A lot of it sort of seemed like question and answer sessions the first times I went through, and I went back, before I would finish for the night and fix a lot of that. A lot of times it was just two people talking to each other, and I became really conscious of that about halfway through the book, so I tried to keep the dialogue sections very active. Keep the characters doing things. But there were just some bad habits that I saw crop up, and I think a lot of it was just because I was venturing into new territory, and when you're self-conscious about that kind of thing, bad habits creep up, and that's the kind of stuff that you learn to recognize the more you write. And so that was a good thing. I recognized those as I was doing them, whereas before I wouldn't realize I was doing it until somebody else pointed it out. I'm actually going to flip through this book, which it's backwards because of the way my eyesight camera works, but it says how not to write a screenplay. I've mentioned this before, but Denny Martin Flynn has a nice fun book. It's real simple, and it just talks about stuff that you shouldn't do in your screenplay. Real tongue-in-cheek, but serious at the same point. And it's a good resource for amateurs to have. Just because I want to read through a couple areas on dialogue and some other stuff that he points out that are mistakes that I know I do. And I think it'll really help me out when I do go through and move this into a second draft. Another thing that was difficult, and I realized really after I started writing, a successful story is very much tension and dramatic tension, and the hero or the protagonist needs to fail, as they go towards their goal. And when you're making something up from scratch, it's very easy to come up with ways that hero will fail, or that protagonist or group of protagonists will fail. When you're adapting real life events, sometimes that's not the case. And in the case of my uncle, he didn't fail. Here's a guy who started at the collegiate level, raced a new event on a whim, won, raced it again, won. And he didn't just win against, a team of blokes. He beat the best steeplechase runner in the Big Ten at the time, and then the best steeplechase runner at the collegiate level at the time, the second time out. And from there on out, basically won every other time he ran it. It's hard to bring drama around somebody who's always winning. So, I had to draft a backstory to bring in some conflict and some other stuff, and it was difficult. It was very difficult to do that, and I don't know if I did that successfully or not. I don't know if that'll really become apparent until I read through all the way. But these are kinds of things that the next time I sit down, if I decide to write a pure drama again, I'll be very conscious of, and I don't think I would have really known had I not wrote this. So, when I talk to people I know who knew I was working on it, I say, this was more of an exercise than something I necessarily would intend to sell. Maybe I'll get it or try to sell or market or whatever, maybe one day if I ever do become a writer professionally, I'll revisit this story. But for me, I needed to write it, just because it was a lot of fun to learn about that chapter in my family's history, because of when it took place. There's no video, very few pictures, very few newspaper articles. But it was very important for my family. And since I wasn't born yet, it's nice to go back and learn about that. I learned a lot about that chapter in my family's history. It was a lot of fun. But two, it's important to take on things you're not going to hit it out of the park. And I kind of use a sports analogy. If you're on a JV team and you play the varsity team in a scrimmage, you're probably not going to beat them, but you're not going to get better unless you try. You're not going to get better unless you try to write at that level. And I kind of looked at this the same way. I knew from the get-go I probably wasn't going to hit it out of the park, but I needed to do it to get better overall. And I very much see myself growing as a writer having completed this. I might go back, after reading this through. I think I'll have a good idea of a lot of things I can change. And by the time I take it to a second draft, I would not be surprised if a good 50% of this changes. Specifically, the love story I created, it's a little and I need to update that. But yeah, I just wanted to reflect back on this a little bit and let other writers out there know that writing something to write it because you want to try it out, even if it's not great, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Every time you write a new story, you should be able to learn something from the process and take something away to make yourself a better writer. And I feel very much that was the case with this story. I've already got the next story on my agenda. It's been in the back of my head for a while. I'm going to put up a post probably within the next couple days about it. I'm excited about it because I've been tinkering with it for a long time. But yeah, I got that behind. I'm ready to move on. And it's exciting to always start a new project. So I'll be writing about that a little much in the future. The next week or so, I'm going to be taking a little less time, as you can probably tell from the lack of posts. Spending a little more recreational time to myself, catching up on movies. I got to finish some books I've started reading. So this next week, while I'll probably be tinkering with some notes and stuff, I don't know how heavily I'll be posting or doing any research for my next screenplay. But that's it. So if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, you hate me, you think my shirt's stupid, I got a bad haircut, the color on the wall sucks, you like rainbows and unicorns, clowns scare you, whatever you want to talk about, shoot me an email. My address is on my About page, or you can leave a comment and I'll get back to you. And until next time, this is Steve from myothercareer.wordpress.com. Keep writing.